So what is it that startups need? Well, I am a serial entrepreneur, and I have a number of startups that I'm working on. WikiTube TV that deals with aggregating multimedia in an interesting way. There's some very cool IP there. Eduit.org has the startup that I started in 2001 is looking to create autonomous learning solutions to bring about a new industry, autonomous learning. So there's some the prize and some other things. The methodology that I've spent years and years coming up with is IP that could be secured. Foundup.com, which is a new way to innovate bootstrap startups, has some very interesting IP. So ultimately, as a serial entrepreneur, which I am, the thing that I need most isn't creating the proof of concept, because WikiTube has a proof of concept. Foundup.com is about to have a proof of concept. And I've done a lot of documentation, a lot of writing for e-singularity and so on. And ultimately, all of those things are things that I would want to basically have IP strategic plan for. The thing is, I can't afford it. And like most entrepreneurs, the question comes down to is, do I spend my money to create a product, or do I spend my money to secure IP that may or may not be of value, and I don't know, and I'm not a professional, and I can't afford the attorneys to tell me, so I'm kind of in a rut. So the opportunity is, why don't we provide startups with the thing that they need most, which is legal help? And when I say legal help, I don't mean advice. I mean actually doing, the patents, actually doing the trademarks, actually doing these things. Because the fact is, intangible validation is now 3/4 of the business. So things like your logo, things like your patents and something make up 75% of the valuation of your company. They're intangibles. So as soon as the moment that I know that my IP assets are protected, the moment I feel comfortable and I can start talking about it, and I say, listen, my stuff's patented. Not only patented here, but patented in other parts of the world. And the fund or the organization that does it is only using the interest to do it. Because pretty much as entrepreneurs, for the most part, there's literally thousands of us out there with innovative ways to create solutions, but for the most part, we don't talk about them, or we don't get them out there because we're like, you know what, I don't want someone to steal my idea. And whether you think that's silly or not, that's the way that it is. And if you talk to any entrepreneur or any attorney, they'll tell you, don't talk about your ideas unless you want to lose it. So, it's a catch-22. We want to create, but we have our hands tied because we have a fear that someone else is going to troll and steal our IP. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is pretty simple. The solution is to establish something I call the 100 by 100 strategic initiative. It's really 100 by 2020 strategic initiative. And what that is simply this. The question is, can we bring about 100 and build these 100 startups with good IP to $100 million companies by 2020, bringing about a $10 billion ROI for a community? Because if a company is worth $100 million, then and there's 100 of them, then ultimately what you're looking at is a $10 billion ROI for Florida, wherever these companies are. Maybe it's not exact, but the fact is, they're hiring people to be there, and so on and so on and so on. And we have an environment now where there are only people with really money. If you look at the people doing startups, for the most part, they either take a risk and they make it. You don't hear about the people who mortgage their house and fail. You hear about the very few that mortgage their house and make it, which is a very small minority. Most startups fail, right? Most startups don't make it. A lot of startups, we don't know how many startups lose their IP. They don't talk about it, how many startups basically don't make it. So what we want to do, though, is we want to make it attractive for startups to come to a region like Florida, or a region like Malaysia, or wherever, or Russia, and we say, listen, the one thing that we know you need is legal help. We will fund your legal help with the interest of a fund. So from the interest of fund, so the fund is not being used, just the interest, we're going to apply that to secure IP. We're going to hold that IP for you. And you can buy the IP back should your, fund ever, should your business ever take off. Or you have investors. Once it gets to a stage where investors invest, they'll say, hey, we want the IP back. And you can buy the IP back at a fair and reasonable value, which I think is, 900 to 1,000% return. It sounds a lot, but it really isn't. I mean, if IP is worth 75% of a company, and you've got a company like that's worth 100 billion, then the IP is worth 75 billion. And I'm saying that I can buy it back for 100,000. So if it costs 10,000 to do the patents, well, I don't see why we couldn't buy it back for 100,000. Actually, it's only 900% return. So, or you give the option, just like people sell domains, you have the option with the fund to sell the IP and say, you know what, you can buy it. This IP is for sale for X amount, what you think it is. And the fund takes, the fund based on the cost, the minimum value would be 100,000. Anything over 100,000 would be yours. So if someone wants to buy the IP for 200,000, the fund takes 100,000 because it costs $10,000 to do the IP. You get 100,000 because that's what you want from it. So you could actually use the fund as a clever way to throw up protected ideas and create a mechanism for people to get paid for their ideas. That's kind of, I think, a really cool idea. And again, it's not costing the fund anything, right? It's not costing them because they're using the interest. Now, as a result of this, you basically have the flowering of ideas. You have the flowering of startups all over the world, or all over where these regions are, and ultimately you have a better situation. Again, let me remind you, all the fund is doing, the fund is not investing in growing the company. That's your responsibility. The fund is just holding the IP and keeping it safe. Should someone challenge that IP, the fund is there to protect you. Now, if the fund spends $100,000 in protecting that IP, that value of that IP is significantly has gone up, right? So they're going to want $1 million back for that $100,000 spent. So again, we're going to take a 900% return or a 1,000% return, just round it up, for any cost exposures that the fund uses. Why so high a percentage? Well, the reality is most of the IP is probably useless. I don't know. And ultimately, the fund has to make money off the IP that's valuable. So if only 10% of the IP is valuable, then ultimately it's got to make 100% off that 10% in order for it to make money. And if the beautiful thing is, the more the fund makes, that money is not going to an individual. That money is going back into the fund, and then all of a sudden you have greater returns. So 30 million may turn into 50 million, may turn into 100 million. So you got more and more money pouring out. At the end of 10 years, once you meet the goal, the fund can dissolve and the money can go back to the investors with interest. So that's how they get their back-end payment. So, if the 1,000% works and the fund is going up, they put their initial 10 million in, the fund dissolves after 10 years, the community's happy because they have their $100 million businesses there, so they're happy for their economic investment, and then the initial investors are happy because they're getting the money back. It's very, very straightforward. What I'm talking about is providing wisdom, providing insight into a solution that is right now, we're in a crisis with the economy, and we can innovate and provide a solution that can help us all. What we can have is all of a sudden is an environment full of, innovation and change, and the startups win, the investors win, the communities win, everyone wins. There's a win-win for everyone. So all of a sudden we have people capable of reaching their dreams and getting their startups where they need to go. So you're probably wondering, well, who manages these funds? Well, whatever is the leadership within a region, whatever is the most folks that make the most sense. It could be advisors, it could be the funders, and so on, legal teams, and everything else. So they become the vehicles to making this possible, and ultimately the solution. Now, let's talk about one quick thing: is how do you I've talked about the management of the fund. There's something I want to talk about, and I can't think of it now. I just crossed my mind, and I've forgotten. Well, that's it. If you have any questions, email me.